Hello, welcome back, class. So, we are coming very close to the end of the semester. Congratulations, you're almost there. Take a deep breath. So, we are going to prepare for the final exam today. So, I'm going to go through this review, and I will not be posting this review PowerPoint on Blackboard. So, this is the only way that you can see it. But if you kind of watch through this video and study, take some notes while we're going through it, you will know exactly what you are going to see on our final exam for this class. So I'll give you a second, or pause the video, grab some notes, grab your laptop, and we'll get started here. A few little notes before we start. The final exam is 30 questions, so it's not too bad. There's going to be 12 multiple choice, 6 true false, and 12 matching questions. So the matching questions are worth more points because there's multiple concepts or terms that you have to match within them. So definitely when we get to the final, take your time on those matching questions. Try not to get too overwhelmed by all the options. Pick out the ones that you are 100% certain of, and then process of deduction if you're having trouble with some of the other terms that are part of those matching questions. One other thing, there's no surprises on this final, so every single question on the final you have seen either once or twice before on one of our previous exams or one of our previous quizzes. So no surprises here. So everything we go over today should be pretty familiar to you. There's no notes allowed when you take the final. Don't freak out. You all will be fine. I promise. When you sit down and take the final, I've had students in previous semesters that tell me, they're surprised at how much they actually knew without notes. So y'all will be fine. I curve the final, so if a substantial number of you don't make 100%, then I'll curve the final up for everybody, depending on the results, maybe an extra 5 points apiece or so, maybe more, maybe a little less. So I'll have to look at the results, but y'all can expect probably a little bit of a bump to your scores as well. All right, so here we go. Let's get started. Final exam review. So we're going way back here. Remember, this is a cumulative final, so we're going all the way back to Unit 1, Chapter 1 with this first one. So try and recall back to your sociological paradigms where we started this semester with. Remember, we talked about the paradigms are kind of like these big overarching perspectives that different groups of sociologists kind of have fallen into, and they kind of interpret different social problems in a little bit of a unique way according to which paradigm they fall into. So, get my pen up here. So remember, we talked about symbolic interactionism, structural functionalism, and conflict theory. That's kind of where we started out in this class. So we're going to kind of go through some 3 different descriptions here, and as I go through, y'all can pause the video, or hopefully maybe it just comes straight to your head and you already know it. And then on the next slide, I'll show you the answer. All right, so it's kind of like a flashcard type review here. So this first perspective sees society as a structure with interrelated parts, and they're pretty much saying those interrelated parts are all of our different social institutions, and they're all designed to meet our biological and social needs. All right, and this is also the one that had that metaphor of like the human body, just like all of our organs work together to keep our body, healthy and functioning, our social institutions also have to kind of work together, be communicating the same kind of values and norms to us in order for society to also be functioning and healthy. All right, so take your guess. Which one of these three paradigms down here at the bottom do you think this description is about? Well, if you guessed structural functionalism, hooray, you are correct. All right, let's go through the other two. Now that we got that one, hopefully these two are easier. So society is a competition for limited resources. Conflict over these resources is the driver of history and the progress of civilizations. In a nutshell, social conflict leads to change in societies. So, drawing from that description, which one of these do you think this description is referring to? We already got structural functionalism, so you can X that one out. So is it symbolic interactionism or conflict theory? Let's see. Conflict theory. Yes, the word conflict was on that description, I think twice. So just pay attention to the descriptions and the definitions that I put on your exam. Sometimes the answer is right in front of your eyes. All right, and then, process of deduction here. We already went through structural functionalism. We got conflict theory. So this last one is, our micro level theory, looking more at closer relationships among individuals, not so much making these big, broad statements about entire historical societies, but more interested in our interpersonal communication, the meaning, the interpretations that we apply to different symbols. And this one puts a much more of an emphasis on individuals, us as individuals being active in defining and shaping our own social world and how we understand it. So, this one's pretty obvious since we already went through the other two. So this last one would be symbolic interactionism. But again, you'll see that word symbols in the description, so just pay attention to the descriptions that I give you, and usually, sometimes you can just find the answer by paying attention to the words in there. All right, so this last one's symbolic interactionism. So there we go. That's chapter 1. That's the only question from chapter 1. Now we're on to our chapter 2 review. So chapter 2 was sociological research. Let's go through, if you recall, let's recall back a few months ago, where we talked about the 4 different research methods that are prominently used in sociological research. So I'm going to give you 4 different descriptions. This will be another matching question, and you have to tell me which one of these 4 down here at the bottom it kind of best aligns with. All right, so first one here, collection of data from subjects who respond to a series of questions about behaviors and opinions, usually in the form of a questionnaire, kind of like this picture over here. It allows individuals a certain level of anonymity, because usually this kind of research method doesn't necessarily ask you for your name or anything like that. So you can maybe be a little bit more open to express your opinions or your behaviors. And a really widely used example that sociologists use throughout our research is the U.S. Census. So would that be field research, a survey, an experiment, or secondary data analysis? Don't get thrown by the word data up here in the description. Pay more attention to the word questionnaire. So hopefully you have guessed survey. So if you see that word questionnaire, another way to think of that is a social survey. Right? Give them a list of questions and survey their responses. Next one. All right, so we can cross out survey down here. Cool. So we got 3 left. The second one is rooted in the interpretive framework rather than the scientific method. So it's going to be more interpretive. Okay, looking for more about like communication and how people are creating meaning in their own worlds. The purpose is to observe specific behaviors in a particular social setting. Oh goodness, well, don't pay attention to that. It's the sociologist and not the subject that is put out of his or her element or comfort zone. So the sociologist is stepping into a new environment to observe another society. So we know it's not survey because we already got that one. So does that sound like an experiment, secondary data analysis, or hopefully you have guessed the third one, field research. So if we go back to the descriptions here, right, you're observing specific behaviors in a particular social setting. The sociologist goes out of their comfort zone. So the sociologist goes out into the field, right, whatever field they're studying, in order to do their research. All right, so we got surveys. We went through that one. We did field research. There's 2 left. Process of deduction. So this one is our third method. It's useful for investigating relationships between variables to test a hypothesis. Very scientific language here. Sociologists create artificial situations and allow them to manipulate variables. Then they bring in research subjects into these artificial situations and observe and analyze people's responses to those situations. If you remember all the way back to chapter 2, we talked about a really famous one of these types of research methods by Stanley Milgram, where he had, remember the shock experiment, and he brought subjects in, and the subjects thought that they were shocking someone in the next room, and it was to see, if an authority figure was telling that subject to keep shocking the person, how far would they go, just to, kind of obey authority. So we already got rid of field research and survey. So between these two, which one do you think? Secondary data analysis or experiment? And hopefully you have chosen experiment, right? Definitely with those sciencey words, variables, hypotheses. Hopefully you got to that third choice there of experiment. Next and last. So this last research method has more to do with studying previous works by historians, other sociologists, or economists. Could be a newspaper, public record, court document, a magazine, a TV show, an advertisement from another particular historical time. So this method utilizes something called content analysis. So basically a sociologist is going to go back to all these previously published works, whatever they choose, and then they're going to really carefully analyze, maybe the way that data was collected in that piece of work, or the way that maybe genders are presented within a certain advertisement. So they're going to go back and use content analysis, analyze that content, And usually they are going to interpret those materials in a new way, a way that wasn't necessarily, the original purpose or intent of that media or that previous work that was put out there. So hopefully this last one's pretty easy because we already pretty much went through the first three. So we talked about surveys. We can take that one out. We've got field research. We've got experiments on the last slide. So process of deduction, right? You're left with secondary data analysis as our answer here. But it's also, just think about the label, that term there, right? Secondary data. It's data that has already been collected, it's published, it's out there. We are going to be the secondary kind of, scholars to analyze that data. So there you go. So secondary data analysis would be the answer for that description. Moving onward to chapter 3. So in chapter 3 was culture. We talked about norms, right? One of the big things that society transmits to us, right, are our social norms. What does it mean to be normal and act normal in our society? And we talked about two different types of norms, formal norms and informal norms. So if you remember, formal norms are ones that are written down, they're established, it's kind of unquestionable. Informal norms were things that are a little bit more casual. You may not necessarily, learn these from having to read it in a textbook or something written down. It's something that, we just kind of, over time as we're growing up in society, watching TV, watching our parents, watching our peers, listening to our teachers, etc. We just start to conform to these norms over time because through our observation, we learn to imitate the others around us, and we learn kind of these more casually appropriate behaviors without the need of written rules. So try and think to yourself, right? What are some examples of formal norms versus informal norms? Give you a second. All right. And now I'll give you some examples of some formal norms on the next slide here. So remember, formal norms are established, they're written down, they're clearly published for all to see, very explicitly communicated. So formal norms, things like, a no smoking sign if you're at a shopping mall, or even outside here at Columbus Tech, we have no smoking signs. Your law book, the U.S. Constitution, right, is a formal norm. Your Columbus Tech student handbook is a formal norm. If you have a job and you have an employee handbook, that's a formal norm, or a compilation of formal norms. But just to contrast with that, right, knowing when or when not to pick your nose, or when not to give a handshake to someone, that's more of an example of an informal norm, right? There's usually not a sign around, that says, give handshakes to everyone you meet, or don't give handshakes to anyone you meet, right? It's something that we more kind of casually learn over time when certain behaviors are appropriate or not. So kind of know that little difference between, what a formal norm is, something written, established, published, posted up on a sign somewhere or in a book, and an informal norm, something that is not necessarily in a book or on a sign. We just kind of know. We learn it over time. All right, chapter 4, our founding fathers of sociology. So we have, let's see, Emil Durkheim, Karl Marx, and Max Weber over here. So I'm going to give you a little description of each one of these guys, and you have to tell me which one is which. You know, which description is aligned with which of these founding fathers of sociology. All right, this one, it's been a while, so this is one you probably want to review a little bit. So let's start with up here. This founding father was a positivist. He talked about the communal worldview, and that was like all of society's beliefs, morals, ideas, attitudes, and he called that the collective conscious. And he said the collective conscious was like a real fact, like it was around us, it weighed on us, just as real as the air we breathe, inescapable. You know, just like you can't escape the air, you know, you cannot escape the collective conscious and its weight on us and effect on us. And he said all the different elements of society, our norms, our laws, our morals, our religion, our language, our dances, our rituals, he called all of those things social facts. And he was very, very concerned with what would be done in modern society. He saw in like modern industrial society, remember they were all writing around the Industrial Revolution. He said it seemed like all of the norms of society were like falling away because there was so much social change. And so he was very worried about this state of chaos and normlessness. And he had a word for that, which he calls anomie. All right. Take a guess. Maybe you remember, maybe you're guessing. Try. Take a little stab at it. You think it's Marx, Max Weber, or Emil Durkheim? That would be, so the sociologists aligned with these terms: positivism, collective conscious, social facts, anomie is going to be Emil Durkheim. All right. Let's get to the next one. The process of deduction. We already got rid of Emil here, so we'll cross him out. So we just have two to decide between. So now we have our next founding father of sociology. He believed that the history of social progress is defined by class struggle. He said that class struggle is won over the means of production, whatever you need to produce things in society, whether it's a hammer or a factory or oil or control over the internet. The means of production, a society's economic system forms its base. And this guy said that everything else other than the economy was referred to as the superstructure. He also believed capitalism led to a state of alienation in modern society because individuals didn't have as much control over their lives anymore. And he claimed that the working class, the word class, capitalism are in here, hint, hint, in modern society is under a veil of what he called false consciousness, because that superstructure was kind of like brainwashing us into ideals that are not actually in our best interest. So we got rid of Durkheim. So do you think this is Karl Marx or Max Weber? Class struggle, means of production, base, superstructure, capitalism, class, alienation, false consciousness. Hopefully you have guessed Karl Marx. Yay. All right. That leaves us with our third founding father. Well, if you get those first two right on the test, then you'll be left with only one choice. So we got Durkheim and Marx out of the way. So our last guy here, He came up with a term. He's German, so he came up with this term Verstehen, which describes the outside observers of a social world attempt to understand another society from the insider's point of view. He was very concerned about, structures of legitimate authority that dominate society. He talked a whole lot about rationalization and bureaucratization. He was really obsessed with bureaucracies and their power over us. He inspired that guy George Ritzer to write about, McDonaldization, if you remember that. He was also worried about modern times and the Industrial Revolution and all the change that was happening. He felt like we were in this very mechanized work world, and that even our social world was increasingly uniform and sterile and dehumanizing. And he called kind of the results of that the disenchantment of life. So we already got the other two, right? Durkheim, got him, got Marx, which pretty much leaves us with Max Weber over here. So Max Weber, very into bureaucracies, legitimate authority, Verstehen, and the disenchantment of life. All right, then this last question here from chapter 4. I imagine you'll need a little brushing up on this one, so pay attention. But once we go through this, hopefully it'll be fresh in your mind for the final. So after we went over like Marx, Durkheim, and Weber in chapter 4, toward the end of that chapter, I went through some ideas that like symbolic interactionists presented of our societies, and what explains what we know in society, what is real. So we went through a few different theories. You only have to know one of those for the final. So this one that you'll need to know talked about reality, social reality. And this guy said that reality is not necessarily what really objectively happened, but reality is actually more, defined by our subjective, our personal interpretations of events. So basically, however we interpret reality is reality, because that's whatever we interpret things as they are. We're going to act on those interpretations. We're not going to act on some like objective definition of reality. So there's a famous quote called, well, we'll get to the title in the next slide, by this theorist, the symbolic interactionist. And he said, if men define their situations as real, they are real in their consequences. So I know it's been a while. So the guy, his name was W.I. Thomas, and the name that has been applied to this quote right here is called the Thomas theorem. All right, so that's really what you need to know for the final. If you see that quote, the Thomas theorem is if men define their situations as real, they are real in their consequences. So on the final, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to give you like 4 different quotes, and I'm going to ask you which one of them is the Thomas theorem. All right, so just study that quote right there. Keep that fresh in your brain, and you should be good to go. All right, on to chapter 5, into unit 2. This one hopefully will be easy. If you go back to unit 2 and look at the title of the chapter, I'll give you the answer to this one. So this is a vocab term. Blank starts with an S. Yeah, beautiful S there. Is the process through which people are taught to be capable and proficient members of a society, and the ways that people come to understand societal norms, expectations, accept society's beliefs, and to be aware of societal values. Now it starts with an S. Sorry about my horrible mouse handwriting here. Word social starts with an I, a Z. Hopefully you are guessing socialization. Right, so socialization, that process we're taught to be capable members of society, and then we learn, what are society's norms, beliefs, and values through that process of socialization. Easy enough there. Hopefully that's a gimme question on the final for you. Next, we're into chapter 6 already. Oh my goodness. All right, so chapter 6. Pull up a different color here. All right. So back to chapter 6, we went over 3 different definitions. One for group, one for aggregate, one for category. So I'm going to give you some examples, and you tell me whether that example aligns most with a group, an aggregate, or a category. All right. So this first one, this picture up here, got a soccer team or any kind of group that, meets pretty regularly. So in this case, a soccer team, they practice every weekday after school, or a film club or a bird watching club that meets once a week or once a month. So it's basically, it's people who meet regularly and they share some sort of identity, right? So would that be a group, an aggregate, or a category? Take a stab at it, and hopefully you chose group. So, right, so a definition of a group is people, they share some sense of identity or an interest, right? And they meet pretty regularly, pretty frequently. All right, so I guess group, and get rid of that one. So now we've got this example. We've got baby boomers, millennials, Gen Z. So these are like different generations, right? Generational labels. So do you think that's an aggregate or a category? Other examples could be like male and female, or even like races, right? African American, white American, white American, Hispanic American, Asian American. What do you think? Aggregate or category? Hopefully you have guessed category. So a category is whenever people are kind of lumped together within certain labels according to like their shared characteristics, but the people don't necessarily have anything other than that characteristic in common. So again, our generational labels, Gen Z, boomers, men and women, or males and females, African American, white American, and Hispanic American. Sometimes social scientists kind of lump people together under these categorical labels. But, that doesn't mean that everyone in those categories, within those labels, has anything in common with each other than that one characteristic. And that leaves us with one option left. We got rid of groups, got rid of categories. So our last one, people standing in line at Starbucks or waiting at the DMV. That's an example of process of deduction here, an aggregate. So an aggregate's when, people are in the same place at the same time, but they don't share any identity. They maybe don't even share any characteristics, right? They're just coexisting. They're there to do their thing. All right, so that's an aggregate. Into chapter 7, inward and onward. Change my color. So what are some examples of deviance in our society? I'll give you a second, kind of think about what deviance means. Try and think back to chapter 7. Think about, does deviance necessarily have to be like some really big, evil, quote unquote, act, or can it be just something really small? Not necessarily, a huge, egregious, act. Think of some examples, and here you go. So all three of these would be considered examples of deviance, even though they're, definitely in a different scale. Picking your nose in public is deviance. Most people don't want to see that. Keep that behind closed doors if you're going to do it, or go get a tissue. So kind of anything that like transgresses social norms, right, is going to be deviant. So picking your nose, all the way to committing a murder, a pretty egregious, some would say evil act, is also deviance. And then, just skipping in front of the line at the supermarket, also deviance. You're transgressing a social norm. So deviance can be something that seems, pretty small, not a huge deal, but still kind of gross, like picking your nose. But it can also apply to something very big and life-altering, right? Literally, like committing a murder. A little bit more from chapter 7 here. So you have 2 questions from chapter 7. So here's your official, actually, let me not say that and give you an answer. So I'll give you 4 different like descriptions or definitions, and you have to tell me whether it aligns with any of these terms down here at the bottom: social order, sanctions, social control, and deviance. So our first definition up top is a violation of contextual, cultural, or social norms, whether folkways, mores, or codified law. And hopefully, kind of just talked about it on the last slide there, so I hope that you have guessed deviance for this one. So this is our definition for deviance: of any violation of social, contextual, or cultural norms. All right, next term. So we got rid of deviance. Don't have to worry about that one here. So we got 3 left. This next one, definition, is the arrangement, pay attention to that word, of practices and behaviors on which a society's members base their daily lives. So if you arrange something, what are you doing with it? Are you putting it in blank? So hopefully try and see that word arrangement and think of like putting things into order, right? So if you see the word arrangement of practices and behaviors on which society's members base their daily lives, think of, social order. We're arranging how society should behave and act. All right, onward. Got rid of deviance, got rid of social order. We have 2 left here. Here's our definition up top: the regulation and enforcement of social norms. I think that's sanctions or social control. Think about like the connotation of these words in the definition: regulation and enforcement. Hopefully you have guessed social control. Those are very, controlling type words, right? If you're regulating and enforcing something, you are controlling it, right? So social control. And then our last one here, process of deduction. We did deviance, we did social control, we did social order. So this last one, the means. So how does society enforce, social control? Through sanctions, our last option here, right? And they can either be positive or negative. Positive sanctions could be, you work hard at your job and you get a raise. It's a positive sanction. Negative sanction, you steal money out of the cash register at your job and you get fired. That's a negative sanction. So this is just how society and its members, kind of enforce that social control, the means by which they do it. All right, I'm done with chapter 7. Now we're into chapter 9, where we talked about social stratification, and we went over 3 different kind of broad stratification systems: the class system, the caste system, and meritocracy. Hopefully you can recall these. All right. So this will be another matching question I see in your future. So let's go over these definitions here. First one, the ideal, keyword here, model of a society in which hard work and persistent effort alone, that's it, leads to higher social status. So you think that would be a class system, a caste system, or a meritocracy? It's an ideal system where only your hard work, nothing else at all, plays a part in what your social status is. Hopefully you have guessed a meritocracy, which then leaves us with 2 remaining choices for our other options. So this next one is a closed, keyword, system in which people are born into their social standing, and they're going to remain in that position for their entire lives with little to no opportunity to get out of that social standing. And back in chapter 9, I brought up the example of like the Hindu version of this system. It would be a class system or a caste system. Hopefully you have guessed caste system, and you would be correct. So a caste is, one of these social positions that you are, again, you're born into it. Your parents were of the same caste, and your grandparents before them, and so on. And your children will be born into the same caste. There's kind of no questioning or trying to get out of that position. All right, so we got through 2 of them, so we only have 1 left. So this last one's an open system. Social status is determined by somebody's wealth, their income, maybe their education, and their occupation. But social rank is not fixed at birth, like we saw in the caste system. So I only have 1 left here, right? Our example in the US, over on this picture, we have an upper version, a middle version, a lower version. It's a class system. Yes. All right. A little bit more from chapter 9. What type of mobility occurs when societal changes, like we talked about outsourcing or industrialization, enables an entire group of people in society to move up or down in social standing? So this isn't just about like an individual moving up or down. This is about entire groups moving up or down in terms of, their class position due to like these big events in society. You think it would be intergenerational mobility, intragenerational mobility, or structural mobility? Hopefully you have guessed structural mobility, right? So there's big societal structural changes, and that leads entire groups of people in society to move up or down. So The Industrial Revolution, even though, it wasn't perfect for workers in the beginning, it kind of led the way for a boost in our standards of living, right? Over time, moving up, entire groups of people in society moved up in terms of their class position and their standard of living. So one big social event kind of has this ripple effect on, a huge population of people in society. Some more terms from chapter 9. All right, this one's, see some matching. Actually, I think this is a multiple choice one. I just gave you some options here. So this next term applies when capital, like factories, moves from one country to another. We saw a lot of this in like the 80s and into the 90s in our country. A lot of factories found cheaper labor or better tax policies and whatnot in other countries. And so, they kind of left the US to go elsewhere. The picture over here is giving you a good hint of the answer. What does it look like? So when capital moves from one country to another, like a factory, that debt accumulation, capital flight, downward mobility, or deindustrialization. You may have guessed deindustrialization, but I'm looking for like the best option here, right? So we are actually looking for capital flight. That's when capital, a factory is one example of capital, but when capital moves from one country to another. So capital flight. Now we're in chapter 10. We talk about global inequality. And in that chapter, we talk about some different theories of global inequality, right? In particular, talked about world systems theory from Emanuel Wallerstein. So you just have to remember what those three, remember he came up with 3 different kind of categories for different countries to fall into. And they were all kind of interrelated in his world systems theory. So, instead of using terms like undeveloped, underdeveloped, and developed nations, he instead came up with 3 new terms. Hopefully you've got them in your head and they're fresh enough. It wasn't too long ago we did chapter 10. One starts with a C, the other starts with a P, the other one's like an SP. So I'm jogging some memories here. So world systems theory, the 3 categories are core, semi-periphery, and periphery. All right, chapter 11, race and ethnicity. So in this chapter, we'll have some definitions really to refresh. So here's your options down here, and we'll go through some definitions. Got oversimplified generalizations about groups of people that do not take the individual into account. They could be positive, but they're also most often negative. So does that sound like scapegoating, racism, prejudice, minority groups, or stereotypes? They can be positive or negative. Oversimplified generalizations. Hopefully you are thinking stereotypes. All right, next slide. So we got stereotypes. I'll cross that one out down there. This next one, we've got the beliefs, feelings, thoughts, and attitudes somebody holds about a group. They're not rooted in personal experience. but arise from, keyword here, a prejudgment originating outside actual experience. Pay attention to that keyword I pointed out, especially the first 6 letters of it. Prejudgment. Do you think that's scapegoating, racism, prejudice, or minority groups? Beliefs, feelings, thoughts, and attitudes not rooted in personal experience, arising from a prejudgment. Hopefully you have guessed. Look at that third option, prejudice, prejudgment. So that will be, see that word prejudgment, hopefully go, jump straight to prejudice, right? It's a very similar word. Okay, so we did stereotypes, got prejudice out of the way. So we have 3 left to look at here. A strong form of prejudice, used to justify the belief that one racial category is somehow superior or inferior to others. So keyword, a racial category is either superior, inferior. Is that going to be scapegoating, racism, minority groups? Strong form of prejudice would be racism. All right. Almost there. Got a few more, a couple more. So we got racism, got prejudice, got stereotypes. 2 left to choose from. This term occurs when a dominant group displaces its unfocused aggression onto a subordinate group. It often occurs after like big economic downturns or recessions, when resources are scarce. So when times are hard, it's kind of the easy way out to blame, some other group. Does that sound like minority groups or scapegoating? Hopefully you are saying scapegoating, right? Which only leaves us with 1 option left. So we did scapegoating, racism, prejudice, stereotypes, which leaves us with only 1 option for this last description. So, any group of people who, because of their physical or cultural characteristics, are singled out from others in society for differential and unequal treatment. Sometimes these groups are also called subordinate groups. The primary kind of characteristic of these groups is the lack of social power. And just because the label may sound like it implies this, it does not necessarily mean that the group is small in number. For instance, in apartheid South Africa, Black South Africans made up a much larger percentage of the population than white South Africans. So we only have 1 left, so I hope that you have guessed minority groups for this description. On to chapter 12, waves of feminism. So you just have to, I'll give you a description. You have to tell me whether you think it's first wave, second wave, or third wave. So this wave of feminism was all about the role of women in the household, like the role of the housewife. Remember Betty Friedan, talked about her in chapter 12. The demand for women to join the workforce, and the fight for greater reproductive rights, things like abortion or the pill, and sexual freedom. So kind of the counterculture of the 1960s and 70s. So would that be first wave, second wave, or third? Hopefully you have guessed second wave. It happened, kind of starting up in the 1960s. All right, this next one is primarily all about the inclusion of women in decisions of public life, and the fight primarily for the right to vote for all women. And this one started more in the late 1800s. So with that hint, I hope you have guessed first wave, right? Kind of the first thing women got together to fight for was the right to vote. And that leaves us with only one option left. Did second, did first. So this other wave of feminism is kind of described as one that revolves around diversity. Remember the first two waves, you had Sojourner Truth, criticizing the movement for kind of leaving Black women out of the debate and out of the conversation of women's rights, and bell hooks in the second wave. So the third wave is more about, kind of including, all women's voices, not just white women's voices. So diversity, individuality, intersectionality, more of an emphasis on personal empowerment and social change instead of, necessarily political activism, which you saw more of in the first and second waves. So process of deduction, you only have one left. So this will be the third wave of feminism. We're getting there into chapter 13 now. Hopefully this is an easy one, a little bit fresher in your memory. The U.S. population as a whole is, are we getting younger as a whole or older? Remember that term, the graying of America. Hopefully you have guessed older. Yes, as a whole, our population is getting older. A little graph over here depicts this, right? The older population, 65 plus, is a larger and larger percentage of our overall population, while younger populations are making up less of a proportion. All right, still in chapter 13, talked about remember there were like, 9 different theories of aging in that chapter? You only have to know one for the final. So take a note here. All right, so this was one of the functionalist theories, so it was one of the first 3 that we looked at. And this one says that activity levels and social involvement are key to the process of aging and the key to happiness in aging. The more active and involved an elderly person is, the happier they will be. Participation in informal activities like hobbies or clubs greatly affect life satisfaction in later life. So does that sound like activity theory, disengagement theory, continuity theory, or gerotranscendence theory? Let's go through these. Change my color. So gerotranscendence theory, that one was all about as older people, age, they become so wise and they start to meditate on the meaning of life and they let go of the small things. So that doesn't sound like our description here. So we'll say no to gerotranscendence. Disengagement theory. That says as people get older, it's normal to disengage from society, to become more secluded and, sit in your house and just watch your cats or sit by the window and not really call or talk to people. Does that sound like this description? Not so much. Now, continuity theory, we recall back to chapter 13, that one could sound like this one, but, continuity theory was more about, say I'm a teacher, right? I'm a teacher my whole life, and then I retire, and I don't want to lose that sense of identity of being a teacher. So then I go and volunteer at a local, middle school to tutor kids and volunteer on the high school or on the weekend to, go read to like, a church group of small children. I'm still doing things in like the educational sphere. I'm continuing that former identity that I always had. So that one wouldn't quite fit this description. So the best one here would be activity theory. So an older person who, they're staying super active. They're volunteering at the library. They are part of a bunch of, different clubs, a bridge club on Wednesday, and, they lead a church social, Bible study on Sunday mornings. They, volunteer at the soup kitchen on Fridays, etc. They're staying active, they're being involved in the community, and that, brings greater satisfaction in our elderly years. So, activity theory would be the best theory to align with this description. And instead of giving you this description on the exam, I'm going to give you like an example. I'm going to say, like, Judy volunteers at the YMCA, and then she works at the library part-time, reading to kids, and then she's part of a bridge club, etc. Which theory would she fit into? Okay, so just remember, activity theory is in your future on the final. All right, chapter 14, we're into unit 4 now. We're getting there. Now, a lot of the questions on the final are from these last 2 chapters, so pay attention from here on out if you haven't been already. All right, so we got another matching question in your future. I'm going to give you different descriptions, definitions, and you tell me whether it's kinship, marriage, or family. This first one, one's traceable ancestry, whether it's based on blood, marriage, or adoption. Hopefully you are saying kinship. All right, got kinship, got that out of the way, and cross it out. A socially recognized group, usually joined by blood, marriage, cohabitation, adoption, that forms an emotional connection and serves as an economic unit of society. Hopefully you are saying family. All right, socially recognized group that forms an emotional connection and process of deduction. Got kinship and family out of the way, so, well, leaves us with one option left. A legally recognized social contract between 2 people, traditionally based on a sexual relationship and implying a permanence of the union. Well, that one hopefully just came to you, marriage. All right, and we had 2 other terms in chapter 14. So tell me which one is which one fits the best description here. What is the type of family that you are born into? So a family that raises you from an early age. Is that your family of procreation or orientation? When you start a new job or you go to a new school, usually they'll put you through an orientation. So something that starts you out, a family that you're born into, that teaches you about the world, is your family of orientation. Which leaves us with one option. So the type of family that is formed through marriage or the family that you create. Pretty obvious, since we already did the other one. This is your family of procreation. All right, had a couple other terms in chapter 14 having to do with how many people we're allowed to marry. So when people marry only one person at a time, what is that called? Starts with an M. And when people marry 2 or more people at a time, like the Mormons and the Sister Wives show, if you ever saw it, that is called, starts with a P. All right, give me a second to guess. MP, monogamy and polygamy. So monogamy is when you marry 1 person at a time. Polygamy is when you're allowed to marry multiple people at a time. All right, this one, hopefully still fresh in your memory from a quiz only a couple weeks ago. So same-sex couples account for what percentage of U.S. households? Is it 80%, 50%, 1.5%, or 15%? What do you think? Hopefully you have guessed 1.5. Then talked about kind of the challenges that families face toward the end of chapter 14. In particular, one of those being divorce. Talked about the cyclical pattern of divorce. Try and think back, what did that refer to? That referred to, and kind of just really pay attention to what I have highlighted here. So that referred to, when parents of or partners of a married couple have been previously divorced, they are more likely to get a divorce than a couple getting married for the first time. Children of divorced parents are more likely to divorce than children of married parents. And children of divorced parents who then remarried are, again, more likely to divorce than children of married parents. So in a nutshell, the cyclical pattern of divorce refers to the fact that, children of divorce are more likely to get divorced in their future, and people who have been divorced themselves are more likely to get divorced in future marriages. And another big kind of challenge that talking about families and marriage brings to us is kind of this broader term for domestic violence that we talked about in chapter 14. So this term refers to domestic violence that occurs between spouses, but also unmarried couples, cohabitating couples, same-sex couples, even, teens who are dating. It could include physical violence, sexual violence, emotional abuse. And we had a term for it. It's 3 words. I gave you the abbreviation here, IPV. This hasn't been too long, so hopefully it's still fresh in your memory. That term is intimate partner violence, IPV. And we also closed out chapter 14 talking about child abuse as well. So this is going to be a true or false question for you. I've pretty much just laid it out here for you. Child abuse only occurs in bad neighborhoods and poor households. Does that sound true to you or false? Hopefully you said false. Child abuse occurs in all sorts of households of all different backgrounds, economic, racial, ethnic, anywhere, regional. Child abuse happens everywhere. So it does not just happen in poor or bad, quote unquote, neighborhoods. And now we're into chapter 21. Should be the freshest in your mind. So hopefully these come to you a little bit quicker. So we've got collective behavior. We talked about 3 types or forms of collective behavior in chapter 21 right at the start. Collective behavior broadly refers to any non-institutionalized activity in which several or many people voluntarily engage. So we have our 3 forms of collective behavior. I gave you some hints here with the first letters. The first form, look at this picture up here. What does that look like to you? Hopefully, there's an R, an O. Sorry about my writing here. The crowd, right? That picture looks like a crowd, right? Then our second type of collective behavior was groups of people who they share an interest. So that was A-M-A-S-S, the mass. And lastly, groups of people who are pretty diffuse across regions, don't necessarily have to live nearby to each other, but they share ideas. That would be P-U-B, public. Hopefully you are saying that to yourself. All right, so our 3 forms of collective behavior are the crowd, large numbers of people in close proximity, the mass, large number of people with a common interest, though they may not be in close proximity, and the public, diffuse group of people with shared ideas and ideological viewpoints. Then we also went over 4 types of crowds in chapter 21. So I'm going to give you some examples, and you have to tell me which type of crowd it matches up with. So a crowd generally refers to a large number of people in close proximity, but here's our 4 types. We have a Sunday morning church service, a wedding, a protest, and shopping at Walmart. Let's see, I gave you some hints here. The Sunday morning church service starts with C-O. It's something that happens regularly. It's pre-scheduled. People come together fairly often for this purpose. Some of you may go to an example of these like during the summertime for like a video game or other interests that you might have. Sometimes it's called a con. So Sunday morning church service would be a conventional crowd. People are coming together conventionally, regularly. All right, number 2, a wedding starts with an E. So a wedding or a funeral or a birthday party, you're coming together with other people to blank an emotion, to express an emotion. So this is going to be an expressive crowd, a wedding. A protest, this one starts with an A. So when you come together with other people with a purpose, with a goal, some sort of end point that you want to accomplish together, you're going to blank together to make something happen. You're going to act together. So that would be an acting crowd. And number 4, shopping at Walmart, starts with C-A. It's much more, laid back. You're with other people in a mall or at Walmart or in a waiting room of the hospital. You're there with a casual crowd. All right, so just review those terms there. Your conventional crowd, your expressive crowd, your acting crowd, and your casual crowd. And this will be your last matching question. Okay, we'll review here. So we talked about social movements also in chapter 21, purposeful organized groups that strive to work toward a common social goal. And we talked about 5 types of social movements. So I'll give you some examples and you have to match them to the right term, the right type of social movement. I'll give you some hints on here too. So we've got Marxist or anarchist collectives with a hint of REV. We've got the KKK with a hint of RES. Scientologists, REL. Movements for equal pay, gay marriage equality, animal rights, REF. And veganism or yoga or transcendental meditation starts with an A. So, I'll give you all a second, think about it. You're jogging your memory here. So our first one are Marxist or anarchist collectives, REV. Those are revolutionary movements, right? They want to change everything about society. They are not happy with the way things are going. They want a total revolution. Number 2, the KKK would be an example. It starts with an RES. These are groups that don't like some changes that they're seeing in society, and so they are acting to resist those changes. So these are resistance movements. Number 3, Scientology would be one example of this kind of movement. Scientology, considers itself like Christianity or Judaism or Islam, a religion. So if I give you Scientology as an example, that's a religious movement. Number 4, movements for equal pay, or a movement for gay marriage equality, or a movement for animal rights. So these kind of movements, they're focused on like one thing, one specific thing that they want to change about society. They don't want to change everything. They're just concerned about, this one issue, and let's make it better. So this, would be our reform movement. Okay, so we got revolutionary, resistance, religious, and reform movements. I know they all start with R. Don't let it confuse you. And then we've got our last one here on the bottom, the only one that starts with an A, things like veganism or yoga, movements that are more concerned about like the individual, changing the individual's lifestyle or behavior or way of thinking. So that last one would be, it's also a type of rock music. It would be alternative movements. I got all your answers listed there for you. Revolutionary, resistance, religious, reform, and alternative. We have a couple more here. All right. And we talked about some theories of social movements in chapter 21. I'm only going to test you all on one of those theories, which is resource mobilization theory. So in that theory, I give you some hints on the pictures over here on the right. What kind of things are necessary for a social movement to succeed? What kind of resources need to be mobilized for success? Well, let's go back to the pictures real quick. All right, got money up there. You've got the NAACP office building with printers and big flyers and an office space, phones, staff, right? Full-time staff. So they have an infrastructure, a building to meet in and organize in. Volunteers, people who care about your mission, and You need to do things at the right time and in the right place, the right context. So those are your answers: money, physical infrastructure, social movement networks and volunteers, and you have to do all of that at the right time and place. That brings us to our last question on the final, our last review term here. This is one of the last slides in chapter 21. So chapter 21, we talked about right toward the end, we talked about like technological change, right, and social change. And then a part of that little section, I brought in this term, which refers to the gap between nations and people that have access to a computer and the internet and those that don't. So there's still billions of people around the world that aren't part of social media, right? We take for granted in our countries that we have access to this and can communicate with each other and get the word out. However, there's so many people who are left out of that conversation, even still. And there's a term for this. I gave you a hint down here. It's 2 words. Both words start with a D. It is digital divide. All right, the global digital divide. And that is that, y'all. So that's your review for the final exam. Hopefully you're thinking to yourself, okay, that's not too bad. It's not too bad, I promise. There's no fill in the blanks, no essay questions on here. It's all, true, false, multiple choice, matching questions. Just take your time. You have 100 minutes to go through 30 questions. If you get stuck on any of those matching questions, just, do that process of deduction. Try and make your best guess. I'm sure there'll be at least 2 options that, come to you quickly, and then, try and sit there and, take your time, take a deep breath, make your best guess. You've seen all these questions before, so don't get overwhelmed. You all are going to do just fine. You've done a great job this semester, hanging in there. We're almost at the end, so close to the finish line. So good luck on your final. Good luck on all of your finals for all of your classes and any other papers or projects that you're wrapping up, in this week or next week. And as always, reach out to me if you have any questions before you get to the final, before you take it. I am here if you need any clarification or further review. I've really enjoyed this semester with y'all. I hope you've enjoyed the class, taken something out of it, even if it was just one chapter that you really enjoyed and you'll take with you throughout the rest of your career and your life. That's all I can ask. So I really enjoyed the semester. I hope you have too. And keep in touch in the future if y'all ever need just somebody to talk to, or a letter of recommendation perhaps. A lot of you are really great students. So I look forward to hopefully meeting with you, hearing from y'all in the future. And enjoy your break. Once you get through all the finals, reward yourself, do something fun, relax at least. All right, bye y'all. Have a great day and a great week.